I'll tell you, what's interesting here is these mask mandates across the country are in flux still. And right here in California, arguably one of the bluest states of the union, Gavin Newsom decided just yesterday or this week to lift the mask mandate on the state, and then he's going to lift the mask mandate in schools in a couple of weeks. Here to talk about this, who's sort of been our tip of the spear for all things COVID, because he is right there. He's the CEO, chairman, and president of a biopharma company, First Wave Biopharma. James started talking to us about the need for therapeutics so as not to depend solely on vaccines. And of course, he's also talked about masks. He's also talked about sort of that we don't know. He was the one who told us that we'd see an Omicron variant. And I think they called it the Lambda at the time or something. But he joins us once again here via Zoom. James, great to have you, man. How are you?
Great. Thanks for having me.
Hey, so look, what's interesting is since we've talked to you, and you've been one of the ones who's been not only supportive of the messaging, but also you've also called balls and strikes and said, hey, look, it is very confusing over the last 6 months. As we move into a post-COVID environment, or I would say an endemic environment, don't you think we just have to deal with the fact that we're going to be different now with respect to, like before we had a flu virus, or before we had a measles virus, or before we had a mumps. Right now, we have this COVID variant, and it could be a new variant coming up. I think we're going to have vaccines every 6 months or every year.
Something like that.
And there's going to be people that wear masks and people that don't wear masks. What's the message that you'd like to see come out, James?
Well, the message is when a variant comes forward, everyone has to re-mask so that you don't get infected. This virus, from what I'm hearing, we'll probably have another variant in another 4 or 5 months. So it seems like every 6 months this virus has another variant. And there's a lot of little ones that are coming, but a major one that's coming. And depending how contagious it is, I mean, people need to know they need to slip a mask back on. But I think right now we're fine. There's data that shows that the COVID virus stays in the nasopharynx, the nose area, for about 10 days. So that's why the CDC is saying maybe after 5 days, you're no longer contagious. But if another one comes, we have to mask.
So James, when the Spanish flu came, which I think is our last pandemic, at some point, will this virus start eating itself, sort of like the flu did, and then each different variant comes out weaker and weaker, yet still infects us, but not to the point of death? I mean, flu, I understand people die of the flu every year, but not in the numbers that they did. And it's been ever decreasing ever since we've had a vaccine for the flu, right?
That's the hope. That's the hope. I mean, this is a SARS virus, and SARS has been around for so many years. But that's the hope, that it starts dissipating, that we as human entities will discover a way to combat this a lot more strongly than we have been.
Yeah, and the piece of this here is I think the messaging needs to be a little bit different. So let's talk a little bit about First Wave Biopharma. A couple of things. You just hired a new chief financial officer, really great pedigree. So part of your C-level suite, you're still able to pay attention to the metrics and the foundations of the business at the same time. But also, you're moving forward with some pretty good news with respect to your therapies. Talk about the therapies specifically and where they are on the chain with the FDA.
Yeah, well, it's a great question. I brought on a new CFO because I think we're about to evolve into a different phase of our company as far as fast growth. So with COVID, I should have top line data fairly soon. We're keeping our fingers crossed, but we think we're going to have good data. And we have data lock in mid-April. So we should have a full data set and be able to go to the FDA with emergency use authorization, provided that it's good. Secondly, we have our ulcerative proctitis trial going on right now. We hope to bridge that into ulcerative colitis. So we've got some good data points. I have at least 3 big inflection points this year in terms of clinical data.
Talk about the first thing we ever talked about, James. By the way, James Sapirstein is our guest. He is the CEO, president, and chair of First Wave Biopharma. FWBI is their stock symbol. You can go to firstwavebio.com. Talk about the need for therapeutics as opposed to vaccines. Is that going to be the norm, do you believe, in the next 3 to 5 years overall?
Absolutely. I think when you're looking at, let's take the biggest company, Pfizer. Pfizer's investing in therapeutics right now. They're not, the vaccines made them billions and billions of dollars. I get it. But from an investor perspective, they're looking at therapeutics and they're looking around the world. People like to take an oral medication and be done with it. And that's really where this is headed.
Yeah, and the point is that isn't efficacy with therapeutics better than the efficacy with vaccines sometimes, because we have a longer period of time to study, and it obviously it metabolizes in your body a little bit differently?
Absolutely, and we're not prone to this problem with the variants with the therapeutic, because we don't work on these long strands, the spike proteins where the variant happens. We work within the cellular, the virus cell membrane, so we just destroy the whole virus and not just to worry about these little fingers that come off of it. So certainly therapeutics is going to be the answer.
Yeah, and I think a piece of this that you need to sort of consider here is what's next for you guys as these therapies come to fruition. Do you guys constantly focus on the next drug or the next therapy that the existing drugs can treat, or how does that work for you guys planning, so to speak?
Well, for us in particular, we're not a COVID company. We're a gastroenterology company. So if our drug works and works well, I will partner it out to those companies specializing in COVID. We'll get an influx of cash, and we'll utilize that cash for ulcerative colitis and proctitis and eventually Crohn's disease and those disease states in which we want to study, which are astronomically large markets.
Sure.
And that's where we want to be.
And that's, of course, it's almost like you want to reverse engineer into those markets, right? When you start taking a look at what you guys can cure potentially and what the FDA will approve, you back that into the most viable and most commercially ready market that there is. So I think that's a smart way to move. His name, James Sapirstein. Thanks, James. Appreciate it. He is the CEO, president, and chairman of First Wave Bio, and literally one of the smartest guys we know, and I'm glad that we have him here.
Yeah, glad I have smarter people looking into helping me.
Well, I like to get it from a guy who's there rather than get it from the government, right? I mean, literally, we're getting information from the sector that's working on it versus the government.